Hello, and welcome to Central Booking, where writers and readers are the authority. I'm your host, John Valeri. 'Tis the season to be scary. With that in mind, I welcome award-winning horror novelist John Passarella to the show today. John is the author of Halloween, the official movie novelization of the 2018 film starring Jamie Lee Curtis, 40 years after she first battled Michael Myers in John Carpenter's classic boogeyman blockbuster of the same name. Passarella is also the co-author of Wither, which won the Bram Stoker Award in 2000 for superior achievement in a first novel, as well as the sequels Wither's Reign and Wither's Legacy. Additionally, he has published the standalone novels Kindred Spirit and Shimmer, and the fiction collection Exit Strategy and others. John has also made a name for himself with television tie-in novels. To date, he has written original stories for Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Angel, Grimm, and Supernatural. Halloween is his first movie novelization and was nominated for a Scribe Award by the International Association of Media Tie-in Writers. Bloody Disgusting raved that the author expands and enriches the source material, while the Sci-Fi Bulletin scored it a 9 out of 10, stating, "Passarella has given it the depth that a 106-minute horror movie just can't have." A husband and father of 3, John is also a web page designer, graphic artist, occasional comic book collector, and disciplined running enthusiast. Admittedly, I'm not much of a runner myself, though I might consider breaking a sweat if it meant outpacing the boogeyman. You, however, can sit back, relax, and enjoy this candid conversation with John Passarella. I promise it cuts deep. Happy Halloween. Hi, everybody. Welcome to a special Halloween episode of Central Booking. I'm really happy and excited to be in the company of John Passarella today. You might recognize the name because he is the man behind the Halloween novelization, of course, for the 2018 film led by David Gordon Green. And that book was actually a Scribe Award finalist. And one of the best movie novelizations I have probably ever read. So welcome to the show, John, and thank you so much for venturing into Zoom to do this.
Sure, thank you for having me, John.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. All right, so real quick, I told you I was going to do it. I'm going to hold up my Halloween t-shirt. We're all fans here. There's Michael Myers. There's Laurie Strode. I was going to wear it tonight, and then I realized you really can't tell. But first, let me just say, and I sort of mentioned, it's a really terrific novelization. And I think that, unfortunately, sometimes novelizations, people think that they're getting a really short book, which is just sort of a punched up screenplay. And this is like almost 400 pages. So it's a really immersive reading experience. And I found that it was such a great compliment to the film. So I just wanted to make sure, that I noted that to you, because it's really a fantastic work.
Thank you. It was my first movie novelization. I've done a bunch of tie-ins based on TV shows, but this was my first chance to do a movie novelization. And Halloween is my wife's favorite movie of all time, so I was almost more excited to tell her I got the job than the fact that I got the job.
Yeah, that's amazing. No pressure to get it right. I was actually going to ask you about that because I know in the book it's dedicated to her, and you mentioned in the acknowledgments that she has a really strong relationship with the movie and the Halloween season, as many of us do. And I wanted to ask you, before we sort of get into the nuts and bolts of the book, did you have a relationship with the franchise beyond, your wife's interest in it, the first movie, or were you a follower of the franchise before this opportunity came along?
I've been a fan of the original movie and H2O. I haven't seen all of the sequels then, and when they told me about this book, they said it's going to wipe out all the sequels. So when I first started reading the email, I'm thinking, okay, I got to line up some time to watch, all these sequels. And then I get to the bottom of the email, it's like, oh, well, it doesn't matter, so I don't need to hurry up and watch all those. But my fandom can't compare to my wife's. I mean, she goes all out every Halloween. She was in a panic because she couldn't find her Halloween t-shirt this year, but she did finally find it.
Well, you can't not
But
have
I can't really say that I'm as big a fan of the movie as she was at the time, but I had a ball just writing it. I mean, just because it's right down my alley. The suspense, the horror, the thriller aspects of it. And I tried to even play up the suspense as much as possible in the novel because that's what I really like writing, is the suspense aspect.
Absolutely.
Although I did get a little bit gorier than the movie on some of the scenes.
So let me ask you too, how did your involvement come about? Was this something that you were pursued for? Was it something that you actively pursued? Because, media tie-in is sort of its own animal in the publishing industry, and it's not really
Right.
the traditional path to publication.
Yeah, I'd always wondered how you got these jobs. You have to, at some point you have to get the first one, right? And I'd done tie-ins back to Buffy, the Vampire Slayer, and Angel. And I guess Titan found me through those because they're on my website, and they approached me to do the Supernatural tie-ins. And then from there, I did a Grimm tie-in for them, the NBC show. And one of the editors there just, I guess the Halloween project came up, and she thought I'd be a perfect fit for it. So I asked if I was interested in doing it. And I said, sure. And I've been waiting to do a movie novelization because I just thought that'd be so, exciting to get kind of behind the scenes and work with the movie while it's still being made, So it came out of the blue. I woke up and Titan is in the UK. So they're doing regular business correspondence at like 5 a.m. my time, in my time zone. So I wake up, check the phone, I get email from Titan Books in England. So that was a wonderful surprise that day.
That is so much better than what I
So
get. That's amazing.
So it's a great way to wake up to have, a job offered to you.
Yeah, right.
And of course, they had, once I said I was interested in doing it, they had to make sure that they were interested in having me do it. So there's always that two-way thing. That happened with Supernatural too. I think I had to send a writing sample for Supernatural before I got that job. And with Angel, they already knew me from doing Buffy, so they just said they thought I'd be good for Angel, so I didn't really have to audition for Angel in that kind of way.
Great.
But by the time I did Halloween, I had enough of a track record with Titan that they vouched for me, and
yeah, that helps.
It went from there, and it went really fast too.
Sure. And I wanted to ask you too, you said, it was really cool to sort of get the behind the scenes experience, with a movie as it's actually being developed. And I wanted to ask you, were you working from a script? Did you get to see the film itself, or was it some kind of combination of those two things?
I was virtually hired before I had the script. I don't know if I'd signed on the dotted line, but I had agreed to do it. And I'd have to go back and check the timing. But they were still, I think, wrapping up filming when I got offered to do it. And they were going to send me the final script, which turned out not to be the final script. And I think I had to wait maybe a week, maybe 10 days for the script. So it was kind of a weird, the first thing I did was rewatch the movie. My wife was happy to watch it with me. But it's outside her normal annual viewing time. But I thought, well, at least I can do is like rewatch the movie and try to get into that world so that when the script does come, I'm ready to jump in, like do the full role and just go all in on it.
Sure. You have to ask you.
I'm trying to remember if I actually wrote anything before the script. I don't think I could have. Like I prepped for it, but and then eventually they gave me access to the production photo archive. I'm not sure that's the official name of it, but it was something like, I think it was 35,000 set photos. So, and they weren't organized. They weren't in order. So I'm just like paging through these. Some of them, you'd be in the first week and it could have been, one of the last scenes in the movie. So they were all over the place and there was no keywords or anything to search on. So you just had to page through 35,000 photos to try to find the scene you're writing about in the script. Like, oh, I think this is the scene where this happens. So I looked at the photos to try to see what scene or the set's going to look like and then write the scene. And some I couldn't find, so I tried to wing it. Like the scene where the two podcasters visit Michael and they talked about the courtyard, and I didn't have any pictures and there was no real description in the script. So I was creating my own description of this courtyard, how I thought this courtyard would be in that kind of facility. It was completely wrong. So I had to rewrite. When I eventually found those photos might have been like 25,000 deep out of the 35,000, even though the scene comes early in the movie. So when I finally found it, I thought, oh, that's what it's supposed to look like. I need to go back and change all the descriptions. because I had trees in there and they were, standing in these paths and nothing like that. It was like that checkerboard pattern. So that was just a complete rewrite. Like the dialogue was there, but everything else had to be changed.
Right. Wow, that's wild. They should make those pictures available to people, and you can basically assemble your own movie. It would be a completely different movie, but that'd be kind of fun. Um, so let me ask you too, Halloween is such a big project, and it's so easy in this day and age for there to be spoilers because social media and the internet, exposes everything to everyone all the time. So what was the secrecy level like? Like, was it an honor system? Did you have to sign an agreement? Or you just expected not to say anything to pretty much anybody?
The hardest part about it was not even being able to tell people what I was working on, let alone like actual scenes from the movie. I couldn't even say what movie I was writing a novelization for. And that was hard because that went on. I think I was hired in maybe late March, early April. It had to be done by the end of May. And I wasn't able to tell anybody that I was working on it. And eventually they said by the time Comic-Con came out, I could tell them. And I think that was July or August. I don't remember the exact date. But that came and I still couldn't tell them. So I had to wait even longer than that. So that was the hardest part. I mean, I would, of course, not spoil anything, but the fact that I couldn't even say what I was working on was kind of a new experience for me because I never had that with like TV tie-ins. I could say, oh, I'm working on a Supernatural tie-in. Once the contract was signed, I would say I'm working on Supernatural tie-in. But yeah, this was a next level where you can't even say what you're working on. I'm working on something. It's very cool, but I can't tell you what it is.
Oh,
And
wow.
people are saying, oh, sure you are. So that was the tough part.
That's amazing. So I don't know. I was going to skip this question to the end, but I might as well just get it over with now. You probably can't even answer it, but if you want to blink twice, that means yes. But can you say whether or not you're involved in, there's going to be 2 more movies. So Halloween Kills, which got delayed another year, and then Halloween Ends after that. Are you allowed to say whether or not you're involved with those novelizations?
Well, I can tell you that I'm not involved. I did hear they wanted to have new authors. So I was a bit disappointed in that because, in the back of my mind, I'm hoping once I found out there were going to be 2 sequels and it was going to be a whole trilogy, I wanted to, write all 3 of them.
Right.
And pick up where I left off. And I was hoping I could do that. And I thought I might be able to do that. And I thought the book was well received. It got good reviews and everything seemed to go smoothly. So I was a bit disappointed, but it would have been even tougher, for that author now has to wait an additional year beyond when that author figures he or she could say, hey, I'm working on this. Now it's another year it's been postponed. So I don't need to blink or not blink since I didn't sign the NDA for not doing something.
Oh, that's fair enough. But that is disappointing because it was so well received and it's such a great novelization. But you are right, because that's funny, if you're saying for a year and a half, I am writing something, but I can't tell you anything about it. Like after a year, we just don't believe you.
And then the thing I wondered about was I added some things in the book and they were approved. And I was thinking, okay, suppose I do get to write the second book and now whatever author is writing the second book and it's a sequel to the movie, but is it also a sequel to my novelization? Because things I wrote, are they going to pick those up and carry them into the new book, even though they didn't appear in the movie? They might have been in one of the scripts,
right,
where I added something that was in the script that later got cut. So I'm wondering how, I'm sure the novelization will be true to the first movie, but I was wondering, will the novelization be true to the first novelization, or will there be like continuity errors between the 2 books,
right,
even though the movies will tie in? But even the way I ended the book is a little more extreme than the way they ended the movie with Michael. So I'm wondering how they'll walk that back if they need to in the book form. In the movie, and that was the other thing, I didn't see the final cut of the movie until long after I turned in the book. So scenes I thought were going to be in there ended up not being in there. Scenes that were longer in the script ended up being like quick shots, specifically like the dance. I was like, dance. Okay, we're moving on. And then the script, there's a lot more going on at the dance. So we never see that in the movie. But I have most of that in the book and added stuff in addition because it seemed like it was going to be a big scene in the movie.
Right. And let me ask you about that because, it really is a fleshed out thing. I mean, you get a better sense of the depth of the characters, the situations they find themselves in, what their motivations are, and just sort of who they are as people. So, can you talk about what you wanted to bring to the table that was, maybe an idea in the script that wasn't fleshed out? And also what the approval process was like for that, since people were reading this obviously and making changes or asking for changes before it was published.
Well, I belong to the International Association of Media Tie-in Writers, and they're the ones who do the scribe awards. And since this was my first novelization, before I started working on this, I asked people in there who had done novelizations for any advice they might have about it. And one of them told me, write the book that you would picture the movie being based on. So instead of it being a novelization, suppose you wrote the book and they decide to make a movie from your book. So I kind of took that approach when I was writing these scenes, like to try to breathe more life into them, that things they don't have time to show during the course of a 90-minute or an hour, 45-minute movie, and try to give it that extra life. So you could envision them taking the book and saying, okay, we can cut part of this out, we can cut part of this out. So my process was kind of like adding on the stuff that in the movie they might not have time to show. But as a reader, it gives you more information about what was going on with each character.
Sure.
Like they dropped the whole, they have Allison running in the first part of the script. So she runs on a regular basis and she sees these things, a dog that was hung by a tree, not hung by the tree, but hung from a tree.
Right.
And as a runner myself, I'm thinking, oh, I can put in some of my own, running information. So it makes her feel like a more legitimate runner that's not in the script, but it's like these little subtle things that runners know about. And then they completely cut out most of that from the script, from the film version anyway, the edited version. So like none of that's there. So just like a little blip here and there.
Right.
So
And
that's things I tried to add.
yeah, in that scene, I think it may be included in like the deleted scenes for the film. I think I remember seeing that. But the funny thing is, it does exist, in your book. In that scene, the opening with Allison, who's Laurie Strode's granddaughter, that was the first thing that Jamie Lee Curtis read, and that was what inspired her to say yes to actually coming back to the franchise and playing Laurie Strode again, because she saw the similarities they were trying to build between her granddaughter and her, and what they were trying to do with some of the symmetry there. So it's just funny to think that that's what sold the movie to Jamie Lee Curtis, and yet it's actually not in the final cut of the movie.
Right. Yeah, you never know. I mean, when I saw the movie, it was kind of surprised to me because I had this cognitive dissonance going on where I had the script in my head and then I had my version of the story from the novelization. And then I go to see the movie and it's yet a third version of the same story. So I'm watching the movie thinking, where'd that scene go? Where's that? How come that's not here? They did that and not that. And so it's weird watching it the first time because I had three versions of it going on in my head. And I kind of got the impression they wanted to give Laurie's story more weight, and without adding scenes, what they did was trim scenes that other characters had.
Right.
So just Laurie's percentage of the movie is now bigger. It's like addition by subtraction. That removes some of the other scenes. So I don't know if in the second movie, like Allison will become a bigger part of the movie. Like, so we'll have this transition going from Laurie through Karen into Allison, so that Allison would eventually become the main character focus in the second or third movie. But they might be heading that way. That's just my guess, of course, since I don't have access to the script.
Sure. I actually, I've heard similar things. It sounds like Jamie Lee Curtis wasn't, on set as long, and she's going to be sort of a more peripheral figure, possibly in 2, and then maybe more heavily involved in 3. But I wanted to ask you too. It sounds like if I heard correctly when you were talking about when you got the assignment and had to turn in the manuscript, it sounds like a really, really quick turnaround time. So can you talk about when you're, involved in a really intense writing project, what your days look like and what your sort of process was like to get this book quickly turned around?
Well, whenever I do media tie-in novels, at least for Titan, they're always 80,000 words. So depending on and they'll tell me when it's due. And I know when I'm starting. So I can do the basic math and figure out I need to do X number of words a day or X number of pages per day. And I basically write until I hit that goal. If I can go over it, great. But I know if I'm short a day, the next day I have to do that day's quota plus whatever I didn't do the day before. So it's a grind where, you take a couple of days off and now suddenly a 5-page goal is a 15-page goal for that day. So you don't take days off generally.
Sure.
And another part of my process is to put the book aside, the manuscript aside. Now with my own novels, I might put it down for weeks and then I'll read it fresh and I can see it with clear eyes. But with these tie-ins, since the deadlines are so tight, I'm lucky if I get like 2 days at the end. I finish, I've got 2 days, I can kind of step away and then read it in a rush and fix what I can fix. But for me, it's harder to tell the pacing that way because I'm so immersed in the actual writing and story that I don't see the bigger picture. Like I'm seeing tree, 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 and you don't see forest. So I'm counting more on my editors to see the forest because I'm stuck examining all the trees. So I'm like, tell me how the forest is going there. So that's generally what I do. And I'll write all hours. I mean, when I was younger, I used to write most of my writing after midnight. And I'd write, when I hear the birds tweeting and the sun's coming up, then I go to sleep. But of course, I can't keep that schedule anymore. So I just try to get it in as much as I can during daylight hours. And it is nice when the house is quiet at night. I can concentrate better and get stuff done once everyone else is asleep. But it is a process where you have to hit that goal every day or it catches up on you real fast. It's like a snowball, rolling downhill where every day you ignore it, it gets bigger and bigger. Now, on the plus side, with this project being a novelization, I didn't have to worry about the story because the story's already on the page. With my tie-ins, they're original novels, so I have to come up with the idea and then I have to come up with the outline. And there's the door. I come up with the outline, and then I even have a more detailed outline than the one I submit that I use as my guide. So there's no writer's block because the outline has the whole story. And with this, I had the whole script. So I didn't have to worry about getting stuck what happens next, because obviously I just turned the page in the screenplay, and that's what happens next. And then I tried to build on that, of course, because you're taking 100 and maybe 105, 115 page script. And if you've looked at scripts, there's a lot of white space. There's dialogue, a little bit of action description. There's not a lot of description. There's not a lot of action. It's kind of very sparse. And I'm trying to turn those 105, 115 pages into like 400 manuscript pages. So I do have to breathe all that extra material into it while I'm doing it. But I don't get stalled as far as not knowing what comes next. Just like the details, not the plot that I have to worry about.
Sure.
So that was one of the things that was nice with novelization, is that I didn't need to worry about coming up with all the story myself. So I guess the difficult thing for me was wanting to match the descriptions to the sets and the characters. So that film archive I had of all the set photos, and some of these photos aren't what you see on the screen. They might be someone standing off to the side taking pictures, but it shows me what the characters are wearing. It shows me what's in the rooms, in the sets. Like I described in one scene, the sheriff's jacket or hat or shirt or something. And my editor said, like, she looked up the actual police in that state or that city and said, they have this color uniforms. And I said, well, I'm going by what the script and photos are showing me. So I want the reader to see on the page what they're going to see in the movie. If they read the book first or see the movie first, it's going to agree. So that was most a challenging part, was because I had to go through 35,000 photos to get all those descriptions down. But it was nice not having to worry about the story for once. So that was already there for me.
Sure. So if you don't mind, I have maybe one or two more Halloween-y questions, and then we'll move on to broader topics. But I did want to ask, you mentioned, your book sort of has a more concrete ending than the finale of the film. And a lot of us have heard too that even the conclusion of the movie was reshot, and it's actually, different in its final form than it was for test screenings. So did you have to rewrite the ending of your book, or had they already done the reshoots when you got the script?
Well, what happened was I got the final script, And I put final in quotes because it turned
Yeah.
out not to be final. And I wrote it in order. So scene one, I'm writing scene one. Scene two, I'm writing scene two. And I might have been about halfway through that process when I found out that they had the screening and they were doing reshoots. And at that point, you were like, hit the brakes and say, okay, how much of this am I going to have to redo? And it turned out most of the changes were uh, to explain motivations better, the flashbacks with Dr. Sartain to make that more clear that he was planning to help Michael all along, and some other flashbacks with Karen's childhood to show what she had gone through being raised by Laurie, during all those years. And then the biggest changes were that ending, because I remember when I read the script, and I read the whole script before I even started writing it. Like I sat down and read it just like I'm, reading a movie. And when I got to the ending, I flipped the page like, this is the ending? Like, is it sure this is the ending? So I said to my editor, are you sure this is the final script? Because I feel like it didn't end.
Right.
So I'm reading it thinking, I thought this was supposed to be the end of the whole Laurie versus Michael. And I didn't get that feeling at all. So I wasn't too surprised when I found out they were reshooting the ending. I thought, oh, so they want to actually make it more defined than what they had originally. So I think and again, this is just me speculating, I think they were hedging their bets about how to end it. Like, you don't want to kill the golden goose, So even though it was an end, and then I found out later they planned to do two other movies, but the producer said, not Jason Blum said not to get too far ahead of ourselves. So I think when they did the reshoots, they made it a little bit more definitive, but I think they still held back a little bit. And I took the approach that this is the end. This is how Michael goes out. Laurie's like undetermined. Is she going to survive? Get to the hospital, or is she also going to, shuffle off the mortal coil? So I kind of made it that way, and I thought, well, if they do come back, we can walk that back a little bit. But I wanted to have it get that feeling of, yeah, this is the end. It's over. But you leave that little bit of wiggle room where, okay, we can come back and say, but then this happened.
Absolutely. And last Halloween question, and then we'll move on. But I just want to ask, Laurie Strode, Michael Myers, they're like these iconic figures in the pop culture lexicon. Wasn't it all daunting to have to write them? And were you thinking of any particular performance when you were writing those characters? I know that you said, you were familiar with the earlier movies in the sequels with Jamie Lee Curtis.
Well, as I said, I rewatched the movie right before I got the script, so that was fresh in my mind, and I was trying to just imagine the character if we skip all the stuff that happened in the sequels, and try to imagine, what had happened to them in the meantime. And Michael, of course, is always hard to read. I mean, he's just the blank face. There's no emotion, just relentless. And when I was doing his scenes, I said to my editor, I did them in present tense because I kind of got the feeling that Michael like lives in the moment. Like he's not about regrets or thinking ahead. And when I was doing his point of view, I just wanted to have that feeling like I do this, then I do this, then I do this, then I do this, and not a lot of like, oh, maybe I should wait here and do this. So I just wanted it to be that present, like you're with him in this moment, like one long stream of consciousness of what he's doing at the moment without planning. And I felt that was the best way to kind of honor the way he is, like hard to understand, but to make him feel like a real person in there somehow, if you know what I mean.
Sure.
And Laurie's all about, post-traumatic stress syndrome and just preparing her whole life and her daughter's life, for this to happen again, reliving it over and over again. And it's there in the script too. I mean, that's how they approached her character. So, I mean, it wasn't hard for me to just like hop on board that train. But how to portray Michael, it was a little bit tougher, to get into his head, but not to explain him too much. Because there was one scene where my editor said, this almost has got like a beautiful description of what's going on, and perhaps Michael sees it that way. Like there's this beauty in this gore and horror, and I just felt like, I don't think I want to psychoanalyze Michael too much. I think he defies that. So, and I wondered if the stuff Dr. Sartain had said about what Michael did was even close to the truth. I picture him just reading stuff into Michael. He's this blank slate, and I'm going to assume this is what he feels, this is what he's thinking.
Sure. Talk about a divisive character with Dr. Sartain. People either loved him or not so much. But more broadly, I did want to ask you, you mentioned that you really enjoy, writing the suspense. And I think people probably know you best, for horror stories, for supernatural. Can you tell me, what draws you specifically to write these types of books? And what do you think that readers or moviegoers get from, the horror experience, the supernatural experience? Because it's a very passionate following, whether it's book or film or television.
Well, there are two sides of that: supernatural lowercase and supernatural title case. The supernatural TV show versus just supernatural stuff in general. And for me, I've always described it as, it's kind of like a roller coaster ride. Like you build up that tension, you're climbing up, you're climbing up, you're climbing up. You know that fall's coming, that exhilarating rush. So you're building up to that, building up to that, building up to that, and then you release that, and then you build up to the next one. And for me, it's about making readers want to turn the page. See what happens next, see what happens next. So I want to keep the readers engaged. And what supernatural in general and supernatural the show in particular do, for me, it's a way of like having horror, but not necessarily having it be horrific, like real horror, if you know what I mean.
Sure.
Like if you dealt with a family member with cancer or something that is truly horror in your life is not something I enjoy or want to write about. But for me, this is almost like fantasy, because there aren't these supernatural creatures and beings, so you can enjoy the suspenseful feeling vicariously. Just like when you get on that roller coaster ride, you might be scared, but ultimately it's safe and you're riding on rails. So it's kind of the fictionalized version of that. That's how I look at it, and it's fun for me to write it, and I hope that people reading it enjoy it as well.
Sure. Gonna say I'm that abnormal person in the movie theater where really terrible things are happening and everybody's like, oh my gosh, and I'm the one laughing, and I'll look at you a little strangely.
Supernatural, the TV show, if I can add on to that,
Please.
it is just really fun. I feel like it's held up. I can't think of any show I've watched loyally week after week for 15 years.
Right.
I mean, all my favorite shows, none of them ever lasted this long. Now, Supernatural's has some rough spots. They've had some not so great big bads, but they've always come back, and I'm just amazed that I can still just look forward to it. I mean, we're over 300 episodes now, and I still have fun. I still laugh at the humor, and I like having humor mixed in with the horror because it kind of gives you more flavors to enjoy, so to speak. And the meta episodes and just the whole relationship, and they've just built such a great mythos that it's really fun to dive into that and work with those characters. So that's been a treat for me. And I'm kind of sad now because I was hoping maybe there'd be one final Titan Books contract for like season 15 of Supernatural. I might get one more shot at doing one more tie-in, but as we get closer to the end, I'm thinking, well, that's not going to happen. But it's been fun. I think I've been doing this since, was 2011 the first one?
Wow.
It might have been Night Terror. It might have been that long ago. So it's been a while. And my son and I, we still watch it every week. I mean, we're watching it now.
That's awesome.
You kind of have that bittersweet feeling, like the ending's coming. You hope it's good, and not like a Dexter ending. Although
Right.
Dexter's getting a second chance at an ending. But yeah, it's been a lot of fun. And I wish that Grimm had survived, because I was really getting into Grimm. And that's the case. It's on the major network. And I feel like if it would have been on the CW, Grimm probably would have lasted 10 years. Right. So I was kind of disappointed that we didn't get more tie-ins for the Grimmverse as well.
Sure. Yeah. I wanted to ask you too. So, you've mentioned you've written a lot of, television tie-in novels where you get to come up with, an original idea that might be based on somebody else's characters, but you've also written or co-written novels that, are original from your mind. It's your story. So can you talk a little bit about the challenges and the liberties of sort of conceiving a story idea from beginning to end that's solely yours, and then also how you sort of balance those stories with the tie-in projects?
That's a tough question. Well, when you're writing your own stuff, you have all the freedom in the world. Of course, it has to be marketable, or it has to be seen as being marketable, and then you have to hope to sell it. And I was writing since I was doing one-page stories back in seventh grade, and before that, I would draw stories. So I was doing that a long time. I started writing novels in high school and then through college, and all that writing, and I didn't get published until I think I was 29. Does that sound right? We sold it in 97, the first book. So I was 26 then, I think, and it had been a long time writing without getting published. So uh, having the freedom to do whatever you want is great, but it's also harder to break in. It's harder to sell. And when you're doing tie-ins, when I did Buffy and Angel, the editor kind of set the show time frame. So my very first editor, Lisa Clancy, she would say, we're going to write several novels that take place between here and here. And I think we probably continued that with the Angel novels. But with Supernatural, I was able to go as close to filmed episodes as possible. So you feel like you're current, but then the book comes out almost a year later, and then you're a year behind. So when you're writing it, you feel like I'm really current with the show, and then by the time it comes out in print, like, oh, this stuff happened last year on the show. So I tried to go as current as I could. I'm watching it and saying, okay, it takes place right after this episode that aired like last week, basically. And you have to kind of, part of the lack of freedom is that you can't advance the character arcs much. Because if I'm saying Sam and Dean, the story takes place between episode 11 and episode 12, we know where they were mentally, emotionally, psychologically in those two episodes. So there's not much of an arc you can have. They can't have a sudden realization about their life and then go back to where they were, in the next episode. So that's limiting in a way, but within the book, you can kind of do whatever you want with them as long as it's true to the character and it's true to the voice. So generally with the characters you add, you can kind of examine their situations from another person's perspective, like someone that they're dealing with is going through something similar to what they're going through. So you can kind of have a resolution with those characters because they're characters you create for that specific novel. So it's fun to do, but you have to work within those limitations. And a lot of times people say, well, we want more Sam and Dean. And to me, I feel like there's kind of this amount of Sam and Dean you can have in it without it feeling like they're stuck. Like they need to move on. You know what I mean? Because
Absolutely.
you can't go beyond episode 12's emotional status. So you have this limit range that you can go through. So you have to keep that in mind when you're writing the stories. And then you have to think back, oh, this was when Sam didn't have a soul. So how much you can do with Sam without a soul changes versus Sam with a soul.
Sure.
And then sometimes for a while we weren't allowed to use, well, I wasn't, I don't know about the other authors, Castiel. They said you can't use any angels, I think, when they were doing more angels and demon stuff. So you kind of leave him out of the story. And then at some point they said, oh, I could use him. And he was my son's favorite character. So it was nice being able to use Castiel in a book. And the same with Bobby. When I did my second book, I knew that Bobby was going to die. Well, he's come back different versions since then. But they said you can either do a book with him or without him. And I said, well, I'm going to do it with him. But when I wrote that book, I wanted to make it more poignant because the reader knows by the time they get this book, they know that he's going to die. So I tried to have these like intimations of mortality in the story, like to have that moment where they can kind of bond and something bad is going to happen as a reader. Like you just have this sense that it's going to happen, the foreboding.
Right.
So it was fun to kind of do that, to be able to deal with that. Now you can't specifically say he's going to die in 2 weeks, but you can kind of have that sense like something bad's going to happen. I kind of have that feeling. And then if you're a fan of the show, obviously you know what happened.
Sure.
So it was good. It was good to do that. So.
Sure. And so more
Did I
generally,
answer your question? I'm not sure.
yeah, no, that was great. And I wanted to ask you too, more generally speaking, and this might pertain more to your own original novels and stories than the tie-ins, just because again, you have that creative freedom. But especially when you're writing horror or fantasy or things that are supernatural in nature, do you have a philosophy that you use to sort of balance out believability with a reader's suspension of disbelief? Like, how do you think about that when you're writing a book?
Okay, I'll take one step back and say with supernatural, we made up our monsters, but ultimately there had to be something Googleable.
Sure.
So you couldn't just make up like an arnifex or whatever. It had to be something that people reading the book could look up on Wikipedia or in an encyclopedia, and there's a basis for whatever you're using. And now, before I was doing those tie-ins, my approach was to look at it as if the folklore, obviously, if it's a mythical creature, or the history, if it's a historical time, that it's not all there. Like this is how we were told it happened, but maybe things weren't quite like that. And my co-author and I did that with Wither and the witch trials in Salem. We kind of riffed on that. It's like what you read about it isn't really what actually happened, or it didn't happen exactly like you've read about in books. So you take that foundation of stuff people know, and then you kind of unveil other stuff. Maybe we never found out about this because somebody wasn't there to witness something else. And I've done that with my own novels when if whether it's ghosts and kindred spirit, or if it's paranormal things or supernatural creatures, is to see what's in print and think, okay, what if that meant something else, but this is the way people saw it. So you have that foundation because you're ultimately writing about something that's unbelievable, whether it's unicorns or whatever, goblins. So just to say, well, this is what people witnessed or what they assumed based upon what they witnessed, and then just try to roll with that. So there's some surprise in there too. It's not like your standard witches or your standard goblins or whatever. So give them something that they might have passing reference to, but then add on to that, like create your own mythos out of that. And if everything else going on around it, I mean, most of my stuff is contemporary. So everything in the real world is still there in the real world. So that gives it that foundation that, we're in the real world, and now this paranormal or the supernatural is intruding upon that real world. So that's how I try to approach it. That would be different if I was writing an epic fantasy and the whole world was new. But then fans of that know, you're making up this whole world. So they're a little bit more forgiving about, how your world is structured.
Sure.
But for supernatural stuff, I feel like the more grounded you can make it, then the more you're able to suspend disbelief and enjoy the ride.
Absolutely, I would agree with that. So I wanted to ask you too. You mentioned, that when you're on deadline, you're a very disciplined writer, but you are also a disciplined runner. And I've heard a lot of times, people who run, people who walk, people who practice yoga, or have some kind of regimented exercise, who are also creative people or writers. A lot of times they say that time in their day maybe helps to bring some clarity to their work, or they're able to use that time to troubleshoot problems with their plots. Do you find that running lends itself to your craft in that type of way? And if so, how?
Well, running is a tricky thing for me because I can be tired and I'll go out and run. And after I run 5 miles, I have more energy than I had before I started. So it's kind of a way to fire up the engines when you're feeling just run down, like, oh, because I'll tell my wife, I said, my legs are dead. I just don't feel like going out. And then I go out and run 5 miles, I come back and I feel invigorated. So in that way, it's kind of like re-energizes you to approach that stuff. Now, I always run with music, which is probably something I should try not to do because I find that I'm most creative in quiet spaces. And ever since smartphones came about, it's hard to find quiet time anymore.
Right.
Time where I would lie on the sofa and stare at the ceiling for an hour. And I remember when I was writing Wither's Reign, unlike for my tie-in work, I don't do detailed outlines for my own stuff. I kind of write down turning points in the story. I kind of take the script approach, like inciting incident, turning point 1, turning point 2. And then I kind of fill in scenes around that. So I'll get to a point where I haven't thought too much about what happens next. And quiet time is when I would just, stare at the wall. And if someone would look at me, I think something's wrong with me. But the gears are going in my head. And I remember writing Withers Rain. I got about halfway and I was kind of stuck. And I went, I laid down on the sofa, stared at the ceiling for a while, and all the pieces started clicking into place. So all of a sudden, say, yeah, this and then this and this and this. Okay, I got it. And I write that down like a page or two of notes, and then I just went through and finished the book. So as far as running, that kind of like re-energizes you. But listening to music, that tend to helps me get lost in the process of running. I'm not thinking about every gasping breath I'm taking as I'm running because I'm listening to music. So I have noticed there'll be like 3 or 4 songs where I forget what even played because my mind will start to wander. And that's about as close as I come to going to that quiet place where, okay, my mind is thinking. And one of the problems is sometimes you're thinking about just day-to-day stuff going on in your life. So you would like that quiet time to be geared towards creativity. Instead, it's talking about what you have to do when you get home to fix this or do that or do something tomorrow. So it can be something mundane, but it also gives you the opportunity. And I have read that running is good for creativity because it does, get your mind in that higher gear. And when I write, and this has been difficult for me during the pandemic, I have to be in the zone, feeling it's called the flow. And I think some writers can write with a lot of distractions. I need to actually get into the story. I need to, when the characters are saying dialogue, I need to feel as if I'm saying it through them. And if they're experiencing emotions, I need to be experiencing the same emotions. Right. If I don't feel that, if I'm not in that flow, then I feel like I'm just going through the motions of writing. I'm just typing at that point. Right. And I'm not feeling it and it's not translating for me. And being that kind of writer, and I can only know myself, but when I had these other anxiety things going on, it's harder to get into that state of consciousness where you're living the story as you're writing it, where you get emotionally wrought. You feel the character's emotions, you're crying or laughing with whatever's happening in the story. And that's a harder level for me. I mean, I can type emails, I can read books, all that, but when the anxiety is just driving you day in, day out, it's hard to say, and now let me go into my fantasy world and live the experience of the characters, because you're just worrying about so many other things going on. Right. So that's a little bit harder for me. It's been a struggle. And I've noticed online other writers, some writers have written like 3, 4 books during the pandemic, but I see other writers like me who just are having a hard time just throwing off this mortal anxiety we're having and diving into their fantasy worlds. But it's something every week I'm thinking, okay, this is the week I'm going to get regimented again. And I almost would like to get a media tie-in contract or something, because then I feel like my feet would be to the fire. Because once you sign the contract and you have a deadline, when I'm writing my own books, I can take a year, I can take 3 years. No one cares. It doesn't matter if I'm not under contract. So it's very easy to procrastinate. But if you know the book's due in 60 days, you can't procrastinate. You just close the door and get to work. So I'd be curious to see if I could rise to that challenge of an actual deadline and to get something done. So it'd be an interesting experiment if I could arrange that. But it's been tough. So
sure. And I wanted to ask you too, I know that you've said in the past that you tend to be a very visual person, and you'll draw pictures, you'll have imagery, and that will also sort of help you to work through your novels in progress. Can you talk, a little bit about that artistic process and how visualization and imagery helps you to get words down onto the page?
Sure. I think that's been true of me since I talked about I drew stories before I wrote them. I would get sheets of typing tablets where you'd pull out the pages, put them through a typewriter. But I would use those to create my own graphic novels. I'd either create my own superheroes or I was a big Star Trek fan as a kid. So I would actually create novelizations of Star Trek episodes, actual episodes, and then create my own. And I do like existing like comic book character stories. I did Planet of the Apes stories, things like that. So I think I'm connected very visually to storytelling. And at one point, it was like a decision point in my life where, do I want to be an artist or do I want to be a writer? And I realized I wanted to tell stories, and that trying to tell stories by drawing them was frustrating to me because it takes so long just to draw a scene. So just to draw these stories, I mean, I have tablets and tablets and tablets of these stories I did at that age. And eventually I thought, I need to work faster. I need to get into the story quicker. And I just kind of switched gears. Okay, I'm going to write. And I started with those one-page stories, and then they became two. My magnum opus would be a two-page story. We had to turn the page over and read the rest. And I watched all those creature features on Saturday. So I was writing those kind of things, you know, my own creature features, my own monsters, you know, Monster from Planet X or whatever it was. So even later through high school, one time I was in a college class, I had this one professor who, his version of teaching you would be to read a textbook to you during the class. So something you could just read at night at home. He was just reading to you in the class and putting up the answer sheets and I was so bored. But I remember I basically created a whole science fiction novel in the margins of my notebook because I'm sitting there doodling, and I ended up writing this 360 page story based on the notes in the margin of that notebook that I drew. And when I'm feeling stuck, I'll lie on the floor of my office with paper and I'll just doodle as I'm thinking. So it's still connected, the whole drawing with the story idea. So I'll be drawing faces or things, and it just helps like get the engine going. It's like oil for the engine to get all the pieces moving. So I still do that. I think it just goes back to those early days of telling the story through drawing, and it just helps me when I get stuck too.
Sure. And I promise you we're in the home stretch now, so a couple quick ones for you, and then I'll let you get back to your family. But I did want to ask you,
Sure.
for aspiring writers and for people, you know, obviously who are struggling now with anxiety, the pandemic, things are very uncertain. Do you have advice that you would give? What I like to ask people is, what is the best advice in terms of creativity or writing that you ever got, but also the best advice that you never got and had to learn yourself and wish maybe somebody could have told you a little bit sooner?
That's a big one. When I started writing, this was pre-internet, like pre-bulletin board groups, and I was really alone. And my parents didn't really know anything about writing. So for me, I spent a lot of time just learning what it meant to write and how to write. And it's just what I've done is read. I read a lot of areas, a lot of genres that I don't write. I mean, I read nonfiction, science fiction, mystery, thrillers, horror, supernatural. And I think it's good to see what's going on in other genres, even if you're not writing them. And I do like mixed genre novels as well. So I'm always reading. Right now, I'm reading two books at the same time, one on a Kindle, one in paperback. I just finished reading The Radium Girls, which is nonfiction about the woman who worked on with radium back in the early 1900s, 1920, that all got radiation poisoning. And you know, reading like a young adult fantasy at the same time. Now I'm reading a mystery novel and another series of young adult fantasies. And so I'm always reading, and I feel like one of the big things writers need to do is read. Like if you're not reading, you're not getting into words the way you need to get into them, words and stories, and expose yourself to that stuff. For a long time, I subscribed to Writer's Digest and Writer Magazine. A book I recommend is Story by Robert McKee and Christopher Vogler's Writer's Journey. I think the anniversary version of that's coming out. And right now, since we're in the pandemic, it's hard to socialize with other writers. That's something I never had growing up. That community might have existed, but I had no idea what was going on. And for a long time, I was going to all the conventions nearby and getting to know other writers. Because when you hear what other people are going through, you realize you're not alone. And a lot of time growing up, when people were socializing in high school years, I was in the basement of my parents' house writing. So it's a lonely process. So you have to be comfortable in your own skin. You have to be comfortable working alone. It's not something you can socialize doing. So there's a lot of that. And I've always been good living inside my own mind, which helps if you're a writer. So I would advise people just to read all the time. I mean, if you look behind me, you see all the books here. I ran out of space for books. I've got bookshelves in the garage. I've got a bookshelf downstairs. I've got books on the floor. I mean, they're here like 2, 3 levels deep. Uh, so that's very important, and to understand story structure. And another bit of advice, my Wither editor said that he liked screenplays because they were the skeleton of the story. And I never looked at them that way before, but it helped me break down story structure, like 3-act story structure, in a way that helps me outline, because I'm kind of lazy outlining my own work. And there are people who say they're planners or pantsers. I'm kind of a little bit of both. And I really shouldn't be. I should be a planner, because I see that when I plan a novel for the tie-ins, I am forced by contract to submit an outline. So I have to go through everything that happens in that story from the beginning all the way to the end. And I have to put it on paper. And they want 6 to 7 single space pages of story. And I end up creating something like 12, 14 pages, and I cut that down for them. But I keep that longer version for me. And when I write, I realize this is so good to have, because you never get stuck. And you can still experience the creation process, because you're going from 14 pages to 400 pages. Right. So it's not like you're not creating something that's not already there. So it's the best of both worlds. And for myself, it's hard for me to have the discipline to go through my own story from page 1 all the way to the end with an outline that I can go from. So for the book I'm working on now, which is the 4th Wither novel, Wendy Ward novel, I'm about a third of the way through, and I've kind of been on a bumpy road since the pandemic started. And I do have notes about what happens, but not anything. I mean, maybe 2 pages of notes, where if I had 20 pages, 15 pages, I might be able to power through more of it. But there's so much of the staring at the blank screen, trying to come up with the story. And during the pandemic, it's just been a little bit harder to stare at a blank screen. But then you wonder, if you had it there and you just needed to breathe life into it, would it be less of a struggle?
Right.
Now, if anyone has a solution for writing during the pandemic, I was going to actually post on Facebook. Any writers out there, have you found a way? Not the ones who've written the 4 books during the pandemic, like I'm on my 4th book since the pandemic started. No, not those people. The ones who are having trouble writing. Have you found a solution where 4 months ago you couldn't write, and now you figured out a way to unlock it where you can now write? Because they're the people I want to find out about. Like, how did you do it? How did you get past dealing with this crazy world we're living in to go into your own world?
Right. Well, if you ask that question, I'm going to be Facebook stalking that, because I think we all want the answer. And I have found too that, it's much harder for me to write right now, even if it's just something more simple, like a book review. Like, I can lose myself in a book. I've been staying up 2, 3 in the morning, hours that I haven't seen since I was a teenager, because I sort of crave that like escapism into a book. So that hasn't been a problem. But when it comes to being disciplined and sitting in front of my computer and having that blank page and having to create something, even if it's just a response to something I've read, I have found that that's more difficult. So we're all going to be like running to your Facebook page and waiting for the great answers.
So you know exactly what I'm saying.
Oh, I do. I feel your pain.
Yeah, sometimes I feel like, is it just me? And I'm just comforted to know it's affecting other people the same way.
No,
a weird thing that's happened to me is I've been having dreams that are almost like, I'd say books, but it's visual, so it's more like movies, unlike dreams I've had before. And I feel like it's a part of my brain that's not being used now. When I'm dreaming, I'm trying to like create a story in my mind, and I'm actually playing. I'm not myself in these dreams. I'm a character going through a story. Now, of course, it's not a whole full-blown story, but I never had those type of dreams before. So I think it's by me like having this creativity suppressed in my waking hours. When I'm dreaming, my mind's saying, "Hey, we want to write. Let us out." Hey, so it's just I've never had these dreams where I'm different characters and I'm talking to other people who aren't real people. They're just characters my mind is making up. So I'm a character talking to other characters in my dreams. So it's kind of a strange experience going on.
Yeah, that's interesting. But it's like, you're right, like that instinct is suppressed. So it's like you're finding some other outlet because you just need to. All right. So my last question for you, I usually, ask what comes next, but you told us that you're working on the next Wither novel. So I guess my last question to you will be, it obviously 'tis the season to be scary, and people are always looking for entertainment recommendations, whether it's books or television shows or film. Is there anything that you would particularly recommend to people who are looking for a good scare this Halloween?
Good scare. Trying to think what last horror I might have read. A book I recommended this year was Recursion by Blake Crouch. Uh, I wouldn't. It's probably not horror. It's more like maybe dark fantasies, parallel worlds. Uh, I'm enjoying the Miss Peregrine's Peculiar Children series on the 5th book. I read the first one, I enjoyed it, but it took a long time before I read the second book. And then I've just kind of read them pretty quickly. So I really caught on to those. But I'm trying to think what was the last horror novel I read. That's one of the things I do is I read all over the place.
Right.
So like I said, I just read nonfiction, I'm reading a mystery and a young adult fantasy. And I try not to read mysteries back to back because I start thinking characters from the other book or in this book. It's like, oh, I think that person did it. Wait, that was in the last book. So right now, A Recursion just pops into my head as being a really interesting book. And it is dark. And there's darkness in it. Characters are killing themselves because of these other lives they remember having. So I'll recommend that. And if I do keep a list of every book I've read for the last 20 some years. So I'll refer to that list, and if I see something in there that's fairly recent, because sometimes it takes me 20 years to read a book, not 20 years of reading, but I remember Lucifer's Hammer and Mote of God's Eye probably have the record for when I bought them to when I read them like 20 years later. So
that's right.
It might not be something current.
Like, why do you have all these books that you don't read? Because eventually I will read them.
Yeah, and I thought, am I ever going to read this? And then eventually I read it. I said, yeah, it took 23 years, but I finally read it.
See, there's hope. All right.
Most of the books behind me are books I haven't read yet. All the ones I've read are the ones in the garage, the ones downstairs. I have my virtual to-be-read list, and on the Kindle, probably several hundred books, and then a couple hundred behind me. So that's a long list.
Oh yeah, I can totally appreciate that. I'm the same way. Like if I haven't read a book, it doesn't belong on a shelf. Basically, our entire house is PBR piles, which drives my wife nuts. I tell her, it could be worse things. I mean, it's books, and she likes to read too. We just have enough reading material,
Right.
The entire world in perpetuity. But it's not a bad thing. I think especially now when we're all sort of craving escapism. So before I let you go, I did just want to let people know that they can go to your website and they can actually order a signed copy of Halloween the novelization, either just a flat signature or if they want a personalization. And I always say that signed books are like the best books. So I would highly encourage people to check it out and give Halloween a read, because you have a whole year to kill until the next movie comes out.
I just found out that the book's out of print in the United States, and I'll probably have more. I have a few left, but there'll probably be more early December.
Good.
Yeah, so I thought for Halloween they might have a bunch ready to go, especially since the movie didn't come out. The movie that Halloween Kills was supposed to be out now, and that book would be out, but now we're waiting another year. So,
and that's the horror story of publishing for you too, though. You think you're going to be all set to go, and then all of a sudden you're not. But anyway, John Passarella, I want to thank you so much for the conversation and for venturing into Zoom to do this. But I'll also let you get back to your family, but I really appreciate the chat. Thank you so much. Happy Halloween.
Okay, thanks for my first Zoom call.
That's it for this episode of Central Booking. Thanks for watching, and be sure to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss a thing.